Hello, everyone. We are discussing difference this week, and in terms of gender, and more specifically, gender inequality. I wanted to begin my conversation with a quote that I got from Lillian Fernandez's research on urban history and the construction of social difference. Fernandez quotes Don Mitchell's proclamation where he says that the city is where difference lives and the city is where difference is produced. Now, in my opinion, it's not coincidental that they liken this geographic urban epicenter of diversity to the hub for the production of difference. It only makes sense because in an area that's less diverse or has nearly no diversity, everyone is going to be alike. It's going to be a homogeneous society. So then those markers that are required to identify and create difference have no value because everyone is the same. So I just wanted to begin with that, just to kind of put it in context for where do the ideas for difference come? How do these markers become effectual and applicable to define difference between different strata of people within a population? Another article that I've read talks about status distinctions and those being based on social difference and being a component of social inequality because the distinctions affect the way that we view other people and the way that we treat other people, and in turn the way that we are perceived and the way that we are treated by other people. The media plays a part in this because they are sort of a vessel for the dissemination and reinforcement of those distinctions and those differences. A superficial difference like a hair type or body shape may fall into one status category or another, may be distinctive to one category or another. And then that category lies somewhere along an ideologically predetermined hierarchy. Now, the hierarchy determines whether something such as body type or hair texture or what have you is indicative of a preferred characteristic or an undesirable characteristic. The ideology is constructed and transmitted to show preference or disregard for behaviors based on those predetermined markers. So status distinction and social difference define the preferred behavior of masculine versus feminine roles in the social structure of a given culture as well. Now, the dominant culture works to outline and identify what culture is for the mass or for the greater population. And likewise, within that definition are the ideals for gender roles. So in terms of gender, let's say, for an example, an elite status distinction may be given to men who display what is perceived as traditionally masculine behaviors, such as riding a motorcycle or having an affinity for professional sports or a preoccupation with sports cars or cigars or what have you. So then within that same context, a man who does not hold those same interests is assigned to a lower social status or viewed as gender non-conforming because he doesn't ascribe to those predetermined markers that are part of the dominant ideology's concept of masculinity. So the idea of nonconformity and inequality is not exclusive to differences of race or socioeconomic status. Gender differences are also defined within those constructs of the dominant ideology. The media have a unique role, the role of adopting these constructs and definitions and ideologies and delivering them to the public and providing continuous support to uphold these ideologies and the imagery and the linguistics that accompany these ideologies. Now, through linguistic, iconic, and inferential texts and imageries, the media are a sort of conduit for the dissemination of dominant ideologies, and those are founded in difference and status distinction. Now, one thing that we can say about that, one thing that we understand is that those differences and the ideologies have the propensity to initiate and perpetuate inequalities like those experienced by women or people of color, members of the LGBTQ community. So that brings me to another article that I've read by Elizabeth Morgan and Laura Davis Delano. They researched the concept of heterosexual marking. Now that involves people behaving in ways that are interpreted as evidence of their sexual orientation, whether they're heterosexual or non-heterosexual. So regardless of whether they intend to convey that in their actions, this research says that no matter whether it's intentional or subconscious, that your actions are indicative of being heterosexual or non-heterosexual. So they delve into the arena of what they call doing gender. And that's where an individual displays behaviors that are synonymous with the archetype masculinity or what is considered acceptable femininity. Now, the two researchers talk about that difference is the foundation or the driving force for inequality. So in terms of gender, functioning in a masculine role suggests that an individual must exert force and control and refrain from any feminine affiliated behaviors, such as the outward display of timidity or vulnerability. Now, based on their study, these heterosexual markers are key indicators, of gender roles. The suggestion is telling of the common belief that behaviors or actions that do not conform to conventional gender role affiliation are indicative of non-heterosexual tendencies. So, for example, that I can liken this to is the male hairstylist or makeup artist who maybe wears a little makeup or has long hair himself with highlights or whatever, is considered to be that he must not be heterosexual because his presentation and his chosen activities are associated with a traditionally feminine role within society. And another example that I immediately thought of was the outrage of certain NFL fans or members of society at the idea of having a homosexual athlete on the team, because football is traditionally representative of masculinity. It's a masculine role. Thus, that would suggest that the participants should be heterosexual. So although sex and gender are two different things, their research attempts to show how one is a balancing act against the other, or how the two are connected through difference. So the assignments are based on difference and created by the dominant ideology, but they are assigned to either the masculine gender role or the feminine gender role. Now, through all of the reading and the research that we did this week, there was one double standard that sort of stood out to me the most, and that was centers around the public display of masculine or feminine behaviors. What is acceptable from a male or a female? One article implies that heterosexual males display overt behaviors to prove their masculinity. But at the same time, the article discusses that heterosexual females sort of walk a fine line when they're attempting to prove or defend their femininity, because there's this fear that they're going to be too overtly sexual. So while men are displaying overt masculine behavior that could be seen as barbaric or undignified, the real unpleasantry appears to lie in being socially unacceptable because a woman has committed some sort of taboo and in being too sexually suggestive. So it's hard for women, because as the Killing Me Softly video discusses, women are marketed to by advertisers as mass consumers for beauty products, for fashion wear, for home goods. But then at the same time, they're stigmatized as being spendthrifts or compulsive shoppers or narcissistic because they are considered to be consumed with their outward appearance. So it's it's sort of a double-edged sword, because women are told to be conscious of their appearance and attend to their flaws, but not to the extent of being superficial or narcissistic. Well, who decides for a woman what is feminine and what is, beyond that realm, or what is acceptable and what is too sexually suggestive? The dominant ideology, right? Well, for men, however, wearing makeup or putting on Spanx to cover, to tuck it all in and cover any flaws is not conceived as acceptable. It doesn't conform to the traditional view of masculinity. So these type of gender-specific constructs are present in magazines and television shows, advertisements, and across a broad spectrum of media platforms. So another underlying theme that I saw in this week's text and the video was sort of looking at the way that difference is defined, that gender is defined, or that even being gay is defined within the realm of the white male experience, or the white male perspective of our culture. So I found that interesting because even in the readings on pornography, the way that whites and non-whites are portrayed in these texts are very different. And so for members of the LGBTQ community, the difference is even more disparaging. Our text addresses the propensity to portray women of color as animalistic or unclean, or men of color as dangerous or untrustworthy, and that women as a whole are looked at as subjects or objects to be consumed by men. So one of the most unfortunate things was if that's not bad enough, there are certain people who are just ignored altogether. And that was addressed when they talked about the gay Asian men who are not finding themselves as a feature in any magazine or any story. They're not deemed as important enough to be a part of that gay culture. So what all of these various groups, from what I can tell, have begun to do is to not conform to that dominant ideology, and to create gender, to create the being of color experience, or to define what it means to be a woman for themselves. So this nonconformity sort of has our culture in a state of unrest, or in a state of expectancy, because everyone is working to define for themselves what their differences mean.